Good morning, viewers and listeners of Concerned Citizens Media. Uh, Thank you for coming back. I always appreciate your presence. Today is April 18, 2023. I have some news update to share with you. So I will start with a video on the situation in Sudan. Then one more video on North Korea from United Nations. Before I go to those videos, I will just give you a little bit update on civil war in Amhara region. The situation is now controlled or calmed down. All the preparation by FANO, Amhara militia, to with the help of the their supporters at home and around the world is averted, cooled down. The intention was to take over Arat Kilo from Abiy Ahmed and the Prosperity Party, so that was not successful. That's failed. So now, in most Amhara cities are quiet and calmed down after a few days of fighting between the federal forces and those Fano militia and Amhara militia. Everything changed for now. So it's quiet, it's calmed down, which is a good thing for the public safety and order. So that is the update I have. I don't see major protest. I don't see major operation or all the boasting, all the preparation by Fano and Amhara militia. Nothing. So it's quiet down for now. It's calmed down. So which is good for Amhara people themselves. The situation in Oromia still tense, despite the talk of dialogue between the federal government and Oromo Liberation Army. So still tough. The fighting is still going on in different parts of Oromia. And I don't know what the hesitation from Prosperity Party to settle this major conflict in Oromia region. It's a headache, the next major headache for Ethiopia. And why, they just show interest in both sides, but no concrete step, especially from the federal government, to settle the situation in Oromia region. So we ask, all of us ask the international community, the European Union, United States to put pressure on Prosperity Party to handle the major crisis which is hidden from the international media in Oromia region. So that thing is still not settled. The fighting is still going on, and the call for peaceful resolution ignored by Prosperity Party so far. So that's the update I have on Oromia too. Tigray region is in a path to recovery after peace signed between federal government and Tigray region authority. Everything looks okay, even though they have issues still not resolved about territory and others. But so far, it's in a good direction. After saying that, let's start with Sudan. Sudan is in a very tough situation. The effort to build a civilian-led government failed multiple times. Now the two generals, Al-Burhani and the other general, uh, Mohammed Dagalo, forces are fighting really, and the impact of their fighting is tough on civilians and others, plus on the country's hope. So let's listen to this uh, video and one more video about from United Nations. Then I have also some news to read from Addis Standard and the BBC. Thank you again for joining me. Let's listen.
At least 185 people have been killed and more than 1,800 injured in 3 days of fighting in Sudan, according to the United Nations. Both the Sudanese army and its former allies, the Paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, claim to be in control of key sites in the capital Khartoum, but that hasn't been independently verified. On Monday, the EU's ambassador to Sudan, Aidan O'Hara, was attacked in his home in Khartoum. The Irish diplomat was not seriously hurt, but the incident was swiftly condemned by Brussels. Government forces say they've reclaimed the eastern city of Port Sudan, but fighting continues in Darfur, where the RSF is strong. The UN Secretary General appealed again for calm.
I strongly condemn the outbreak of fighting that is taking place in Sudan and appeal to the leaders of the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces to immediately cease hostilities, restore calm, and begin a dialogue to resolve the crisis. The situation has already led to horrendous loss of life, including many civilians.
The World Health Organization says many hospitals are struggling to cope, reporting shortages of blood and medical supplies. The fighting broke out on Saturday after disagreements between the leaders of the armed forces and the RSF over the planned integration of the paramilitary group into the regular army.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you once again
Okay,
for
this one
being
is
here.
United Nations on
I'm going
North
to begin
Korea.
by delivering a joint statement on behalf of Albania, Ecuador, France, Japan, Malta, the Republic of Korea, Switzerland, the United Arab Emirates, the United Kingdom, and the United States on DPRK. And I will stay behind for a few minutes on my own and speak to the situation in Sudan. On DPRK, we condemn in the strongest possible terms the DPRK's April 12th solid fuel intercontinental ballistic missile launch. This reckless, unannounced launch threatens civilians and the safe navigation of ships and planes within the region. This type of irresponsible activity, alongside destabilizing messages, is imprudent and dangerous, and we must not condone it as business as usual. Each and every one of the DPRK's 17 ballistic missile launches this year is a blatant violation of multiple UN Security Council resolutions. Each and every launch poses a threat to the region. We remain committed to peaceful, diplomatic, and political solutions and continue to call on the DPRK to return to dialogue toward denuclearization. It is incumbent upon the DPRK's government to respond to these calls. We urge all UN member states to join us in strongly condemning this perilous behavior and in demanding the DPRK refrain from conducting further ballistic missile launches or a seventh nuclear test. The DPRK must abandon its unlawful weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missile program in a complete, verifiable, and irreversible manner. We also call on member states to continue to fully implement the relevant Security Council resolutions as the DPRK's revenue generation activities throughout the world, including its malicious cyber activities, have contributed to these weapons programs and related activities, including the April 12th launch. The Security Council must overcome its prolonged silence, act on its responsibility to effectively address this security threat, and promote peace and security in the Korean Peninsula. Thank you very much.
Could you tell us if there's anything relevant regarding President presidential statement draft that you circulated?
I don't have anything on that. We're working on those issues in the council. Now I'd like to. If you want to go with it, and then
in a two-day event organized by the UN International Organization for Migration.
Okay, I will come back to this one after reading some other news update. So that's about the first two videos, the update on situation in Sudan and North Korea ballistic missile from United Nations. Thank you again. Let's read this and a couple of them from Addis Standard. Let me read. Ethiopia-Sudan bilateral tension, domestic crisis threaten security, development of Horn region. This is reported by Chatham House. Cross-border and domestic tension and interlinked crisis in Ethiopia and Sudan, as well as across the Horn of Africa, jeopardized security and development. Report by renowned Policy Institute Chatham House said. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or GERD, disputed territory of Al-Fashqa, and war in northern Ethiopia are only a few examples of a range of cross-border concerns that have strained relations between Ethiopia and Sudan since 2018. As of 2018, both countries underwent transitions that held out the prospect of a more democratic civilian administration and improved regional stability, according to the report. But since 2020, amid a violent war in Tigray and other regions of northern Ethiopia, as well as a disastrous military coup in Sudan, contestation between old and new political forces has caused those transitions to veer off track. Also, it is indicated that other regional and geopolitical actors, including Egypt, Eritrea, and the Gulf Arab states, pursuing their own, often conflicting interests in Ethiopia and Sudan, have been complicating promising de-escalation and resolution. Despite rising tensions, Chatham House stated the conflict now seems unlikely in the wake of conciliation between the two countries' leaders. Yet, however, the situation is fragile and efforts to restore relations must be reinforced. If border disputes are not resolved, tensions may rise once more, endangering regional stability and hurting economic development and humanitarian outcomes, said the report. Political agreements aimed at ending hostilities in northern Ethiopia and seeking to secure a more robust civilian government in Sudan provide an opportunity to renew both transitions if the necessary diplomatic backing is forthcoming. The African Union and the Intergovernmental Authority on Development struggled to intervene effectively in problems encountered by both countries up until the Pretoria Agreement was signed by Ethiopian parties, federal government, and the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front TPLF in Pretoria, South Africa, November 2022, last year, report reads. International efforts to support regional stability should work towards coordinating responses, addressing the intersection of crisis and causes of instability within and between both countries, said the report. The junction of crisis and the source of instability within and between both countries should be addressed as part of international effort to sustain regional stability. Refreshed US involvement and increased collaboration with allies, including EU, UK, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, could persuade allies to move beyond securitized approaches in favor of developing policies that show greater sensitivity to national and subnational context in the Horn. It is also indicated that a more cohesive international engagement is needed, as well as enhanced alignment between regional envoys, which, if effectively connected with continental and regional diplomatic mechanisms, could provide the foundation for long-term stability and integration. Recently, on Saturday, fighting erupted in Sudan's capital between General Abdul Fattah al-Burhan army, head of Sudan's Transitional Governing Sovereign Council, and the paramilitary Rapid Support Force, RSF, led by General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, deputy head of the council, VOA reported. So that is the Chatham House report on the tension between Sudan and Ethiopia. This is not good report on Ethiopia. This is Freedom House annual report, labels Ethiopia not free again. This is not good. Let me read quickly. This is for 2022 yearly report. So this year not yet. So this is for 2022 year, fiscal year 2022 report by Freedom House. The annual report by the US-based Freedom House has once again labeled Ethiopia among countries that are not free, with a freedom score of 21 out of 100. The Freedom House has assessed a range of activities in Ethiopia in 2022 in terms of human and political rights, involvement in public politics, justice, government operation, freedom of expression, association and organizational rights, application of the rule of law, arrests, and access to information about the 2-year-long war in Tigray. So the report focuses on all these issues. The report indicated that Ethiopia scored 21 out of 100 on the global freedom score. 21. With freedom of political rights score standing at only 10, while civil liberties score is 11. According to the report, at the start of the war in Tigray, internet and the telephone lines were cut and the journalists were denied access to the region. The involvement of Eritrean soldiers, the status of refugee camps, and the humanitarian situation in Tigray all remain uncertain. The conflict between the federal government and the Tigray People Liberation Front, TPLF, in the Tigray over the course of 2 years caused the deaths of an estimated 600,000 people, and there remain a high risk of further mass atrocities being committed, said the report. The federal government and the Tigray People Liberation Front signed a permanent cessation of hostilities agreement through peace talks mediated by the African Union in November last year. The report stated that very little information is available about counter-insurgency operations and ethnic conflict in Oromia, Benishangul Gumuz, and Amhara. Also, the extent of the human rights abuses and war crimes committed in these areas remain difficult to verify, it noted. In May, government forces arrested over 4,500 individuals, including journalists and activists, in what was a widespread crackdown in the Amhara region, said the report. The government provided no justification for the arrest, and whether the people arrested in May remained in custody at the end of the year was unclear. It is also stated that independent journalists remain constrained by security imperatives that limit their ability to work and travel, as well as repeatedly come under government pressure over their coverage of the internal conflict in Tigray and Oromo. In some cases, journalists were detained without charge, expelled from the country, or had their licenses revoked in 2022. EMA and security institutions warned and threatened media outlets reported on the violent conflict and pressured them to adhere to the government narrative, reports read. Journalists also faced pressure, arrests, threats, and harassment, both online and offline, from the government to disclose the identities of their sources. In August 2022, the federal police announced that charges had been filed against 111 owners of illegal digital media outlets, accusing them of working to incite violence, according to the report. On 11 April, Addis Standard reported that the federal government has detained at least 4 journalists and media personalities in 1 week for suspecting involvement in acts that incited violence in the country. Among the detained are Maskeram Abarra, founder and owner of Ethio Niqat, Gannet Asmamaw of Yeneta Media, Abbay Zaudu from Amhara Media Center, Aragao Sisai from Roha News. Earlier in March, Getnet Ashagre, editor-in-chief of Amhara Voice Media, has also been detained. The report also stated that the corruption and unequal resource distribution are significant problems that have contributed to the recent civil unrest throughout Ethiopia. However, the ruling party has accused public servants or opposition politicians of corruption as a political weapon to punish dissent. The government established a national committee to coordinate an anti-corruption campaign in November 2022. The committee announced it had received over 250 tips within a week of its creation and testified to the widespread presence of corruption, labeling it as a major threat to national security. Ethiopia's security forces have maintained significant influence over the judicial process, especially in cases against opposition leaders and other political adversaries. Due process rights are generally not respected. The right to a fair trial is often not respected, particularly for government critics. Security forces who commit human rights abuses and violence go unpunished. It is also reported that local civil society organizations face threats and warning for advocating for issues contrary to the government's position, especially in relation to internal conflict. The law and policy practices do not guarantee the population, indicates the report, and the number of internally displaced people in Ethiopia surpassed 2.72 million as of July 2022. Due to the violence conflict, freedom of movement is also highly impeded. So that's is a very, very tough report on the situation in Ethiopia by Freedom House. Yeah, this is concerning the freedom of journalism, free expression, free assembly, the due process. All this is failed. Is like F really is a F report for Prosperity Party, and this is clearly visible in case of OLF senior officials who are, tried by justice, by country's constitution, and the justice, check the left, right, all the evidence brought against them and let them free. But the security apparatus, the police, the federal police, and the prosperity authority still keep them in jail despite they are free by the court. And some of them, like Anissa Yana and others, are suffering due to lack of medical treatment in prison, in Ethiopian prison. So this is a true report, really. Thank you, Freedom House, for reporting based on the credible evidence. And Ethiopia is heading in a wrong direction concerning citizens media and others media has been reporting Abiy Ahmed Prosperity Party is heading in a wrong direction, especially in the accountability. Those accountability and justice and the freedom of journalism. So that is a report by Freedom House. This one again at this standard, World Bank tells Ethiopia to remove macroeconomic distortions to help slow inflation, unlock investment. So Ethiopia is lobbying the World Bank and IMF to get money, but so they are not okay. They are still telling the Ethiopian government to do something. This was reported on April 14, 2023. World Bank Group President David Malpass met with Ahmed Shide, Minister of Finance of Ethiopia. In his conversation with Minister Shide, President Malpass discussed the progress achieved by Ethiopian authorities in the implementation of the November 2022 peace agreement. President Malpass encouraged further steps toward durable peace and prosperity for all Ethiopians. President Malpass and Minister Ahmed Shide spoke extensively about the challenging global outlook for developing countries and Ethiopia's urgent need to restore macroeconomic stability. President Malpass emphasized the benefit of rapid and decisive policy reforms amid the challenging context of droughts, internal conflict, debt distress, and compounding structural challenges. President Malpass urged the government to remove macroeconomic distortions, which will help slow inflation and unlock investment. President Malpass stressed the importance of moving away from a state-driven economic model and to enhance the business-enabling environment, allow for more competition in the financial sector, and facilitate private sector-led growth. Noting slow progress in the implementation of the G20 Common Framework, President Malpass urged a rapid agreement of official bilateral and private sector creditors on a debt treatment for Ethiopia. President Malpass emphasized the World Bank Group's strong support to Ethiopia, including budget support in the form of grants and highly concessional credits as the government implements a robust reform program to restore macroeconomic stability and poverty reduction. So they are encouraged by the development, but they are still not completely satisfied by the progress happening in Ethiopia, especially the situation in peace, and also, selling those financial institutions and the government on airlines and others to private sector. So that is their demand. They don't want the government to control the financial institution by itself or the airlines and other industries. So they want to force the Ethiopian government to make privatize those companies. Then they will start providing money. So we'll see. Okay, this is Blinken says U.S. diplomat convoy fired upon. A U.S. diplomatic convoy came under fire in Sudan on Monday, but nobody was hurt, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said. This action was reckless, it was irresponsible, and of course unsafe, he told reporters in Japan after G7 talks. Sudan has been grappled for days by deadly fighting between rival forces. Earlier, it was reported that the EU's ambassador in Sudan, Aidan O'Hara, has been assaulted at his home in the capital Khartoum, as you heard from EU report. Around 185 people have been killed and more than 1,800 injured in the 3 days of fighting in Sudan, according to the UN. The city has seen airstrikes, shelling, and heavy small arms fire. Both the army and a paramilitary group called the Rapid Support Force, or RSF, claimed to control key sites in Khartoum, where residents have been sheltering from explosions. Mr. O'Hara was not seriously hurt, Irish Foreign Minister Michael Martin confirmed. He described the attack as a gross violation of obligations to protect diplomats. Mr. Martin described the ambassador as an outstanding Irish and European diplomat who is serving the EU under the most difficult circumstances. We thank him for his service and call for an urgent cessation of violence in Sudan and the resumption of dialogue, he said. So Sudan is becoming very tough. I think they should go back to the table and transfer the power to civilians instead of fighting between these military chiefs for power. This also on Kenya to evacuate 3,000 caught up in Sudan crisis. At least 3,000 Kenyans are stuck in the Sudan fighting, Foreign Affairs Minister Alfred Mutua said on Sunday. Mr. Mutua said that the government was in communication with the national carrier Kenya Airways in a bid to try and evacuate them once things cool off. We are in touch with our embassy in Sudan and will help Kenyans stuck there due to the ongoing war, Mr. Mutua said. Kenya's President William Ruto has asked regional leaders to take a firm position on the Sudan crisis to restore peace in the country. Fighting between government forces and the Rapid Support Force (RSF) continued on Monday despite pleas by the international community to warring parties to cease fire. Credit BBC. One more. This is again on Sudan. Stop the tragedy and the mockery of Africa. There have been multiple calls on the continent for an end to the fighting, which is now its third day and has led to dozens of deaths. Here is a look at what leaders of other African nations have said. South Africa labeled the situation in Sudan disturbing and appealed to the rival factions to spare the Sudanese people and any further violence during the holy months of Ramadan. Uganda, President Yoweri Museveni said it was of the utmost importance to cease the hostilities to stop the tragedy and mockery of Africa. Kenya, President William Ruto asked regional leaders to take a firm position to restore peace in Khartoum. Kenyan authorities say they are planning to evacuate 3,000 nationals stuck in Sudan, as I said. Ethiopia, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said the clash contradicts the long-standing and deep-rooted Sudanese norms and values. Chad, the ruling junta has closed the border with Sudan and called on the belligerents to commence dialogue. Guinea-Bissau, President Umaro Sissoco Embalo, who is also chair of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, has similarly appealed for calm and dialogue. So this is reactions from African leaders on the situation in Sudan. So that's all I have for reading. Let's continue watching a couple of videos I selected for today's update and conclude today's presentation. Thank you again for coming back. Yeah.
Or IOM, East African ambassadors to the U.S. and leaders from the diaspora community discussed ways to contribute to the economic development of their home countries. One of the speakers was Robi Kakenji, the Ugandan ambassador to the U.S.
It is really, really important that we continue to be engaged, because through that engagement is where you now get mentorship, is where you now get social connections. But more importantly, it's how you begin to understand your role as being a citizen of this country, but also being a citizen of where you come from.
Lemma Waldesembet, a professor of finance at the University of Maryland, says it's about more than just sending money back home.
Those of us in the diaspora have left that region, but the region has not left us. So this is a mechanism for us to giving back. We give back just not money, but also capacity building, technical assistance, and get connected so that we help develop where we came from and impact livelihood.
Many attendees say One goal is to give workers in their home countries the skills that employers need. Torono Rotich, an associate dean for belonging, diversity, and inclusion at Indiana University, is one of many Kenyan diaspora members who travels home to give back. As a founder of a Kenyan Students in Diaspora Foundation, Rotich said her organization took teachers back to Kenya to work with universities, mentor graduate students, and help curriculum development. But it's not always an easy job.
So they look at you very skeptical, as if you want to take over their positions, especially those in leadership. I'm like, no, I'm just here to help. I'm just here to empower, because I see the opportunities that are outside.
The International Organization for Migration has been helping the Somali government on a national diaspora policy, which is slated to be ratified this year. The policy is intended to unify and mobilize Somali diaspora networks to help rebuild the nation. Saida Shaiya works for Somalia's foreign ministry. Shaiya says the new policy will bring new skills and investments to Somalia.
So I am an example of that. I grew up in America, and I went back to Somalia because Somalia needs someone like me who has the skills, who understands the issues, who can contribute in so many different levels.
Participants said that with continued support and investment, the African diaspora has the potential to be a powerful force for change and progress on the continent. For Abdulaziz Osman, Salam Salman, VOA News, Washington.
Okay, one more about South Sudan.
Cultural festival is one way which South Sudanese population can come together and be united and almost eliminate all forms of conflict.
We will really promote our culture, we will really embrace our culture, we will really maintain our culture and even modernize it in a beautiful way. Like what we have seen today, there are certain things that are being modernized in our cultures, which is so amazing. And there is a unique thing that we commonly do together as different tribes. It really gives us more dignity, give us more respect, make us be proud of ourselves as South Sudanese.
Okay, so these are the videos I selected for you for today's update. So that's the last one is South Sudanese celebrating of their cultures and diversity and to promote peace in that country, which is good. Let me conclude today's news updates by saying I wish the Sudanese generals stop this fighting for power and settle their disagreement in a peaceful manner and come to the table and transfer the power as they promised before to the civilian leadership. So that will end, the death and the destruction the conflict bring to Sudan. So that they have to come to the table and end this senseless war. On Ethiopia, the situation in Oromia especially is a very tense. Some reports are coming out. Prosperity Party is using again the country's resources, the country's limited resources to continue the fighting against Oromo Liberation Army. It's senseless and it's meaningless the country cannot afford to continue fighting this useless war, civil war. So they must be forced in the same way, they did in the war in the Tigray region. They must be forced by European Union, African Union, and the United States to settle this major explosive, even more dangerous than the Tigray war, the war in Oromia. That must come to an end, and the Prosperity Party, they must stop spending money, the country's limited money, and they must stop their preparation to go to war with oil. They have to come to the table, settle their dispute, share the power, and bring peace to that region. That's all I'm going to say for today. Thank you for joining me. I will be back hopefully before the end of the fasting season. If not, after the Eid. So thank you again. Be safe and so long.